My name is Jim Russell. I teach at Eastern Connecticut State University, and I want to first express my gratitude to the two people who organized this panel, Jimena de Altfather and Ricardo Della Bono, and really recommend their books to you. I've read both of them. The first one, Latin America After the Neoliberal Debacle, is in my mind the most sophisticated account of the thinking that's going on that's leading to the need for new constitutions. It includes an extensive critique of all of the things that went wrong. And then there's a second book that has just been published, Neoliberalism's Fractured Showcase, which is Jimena de la Barda's book, in which it is written entirely by Chileans, going into area after area after area of what happened in the neoliberal transformation of Chile. And that's really a fantastic book. I don't think there's anything else like it in English. Well, I'm coming to you from Connecticut. I, of course, like people of my age, was very familiar with the 1973 coup and was very much in solidarity with the resistance to it. But I went to Chile in June last year in an entirely different reason, which is indeed related to the coup, but not so much in terms of solidarity. That is, in Connecticut, state workers, like state workers in a lot of other states, have a choice between two retirement plans: a defined benefit plan, which is a traditional pension, and a defined contribution plan, which is essentially a 401k. And I was one of the people who got suckered into the 401k type plan. Anybody who's in academia, if you're in TIAA-CREF, you know what that's all about. We discovered that we were paying twice as much in employee contributions and receiving half as much in employee benefits in retirement. Let me repeat that. We were paying twice as much in employee contributions, yet receiving only half the retirement benefits. And so we thought, this is horrible. Why can't we get into the plan that actually works? And so we started a movement in Connecticut to do that in 2008. And in September of 2011, we won, which may be a precedent in the entire country because everything is going in the opposite direction. That is, they're trying to push state employees into 401ks. They're really speaking horrors about how expensive pensions are for those workers, which is entirely untrue, by the way. And we can get into that later if you want to, but it's one of the great myths that's going on in what I like to refer to as the biggest class swindle in 30 years, and it all has to do with retirement. Well, that led me to Chile, because I knew that we essentially had in Connecticut what the Chileans had had since 1981. So I want to lay out the chronology of those events and the interlinking of what happened in Chile with what's happening in the United States, and then what happened in Argentina, to kind of pull this all together as a big tale, which is interconnected because this is very much an international issue. So let's go back to 1962. And Milton Friedman, many of us are familiar with, wrote in Capitalism and Freedom that he was opposed to defined benefit national retirement systems. Defined benefit national retirement systems, let me just intercut here a little bit, are like Social Security, in which money is paid into a fund, and then when people retire, out of that fund comes the benefits that people receive, and your benefits are guaranteed. He was opposed to that for two reasons. One, because ideologically, these plans did not foster the values of individual responsibility. Okay, that each person should be individually responsible for their retirement. Okay, and if they were not provident enough to put away money, then they should suffer the consequences of a poor retirement. And the other, though, which I think is far bigger, is that instead of this money going into government accounts, he wanted it to go into Wall Street, okay, to bolster private enterprise. Okay, and so that's 1962. Now, it turns out that his university, the University of Chicago, had a lot of influence over the training of economists in Chile, so that in 1963, 12 of the 13 faculty members at the Universidad Católica in their economics department were graduates of the Milton Friedman program at the University of Chicago. One of the most eager students he had was a man named Jose Piñera. Jose Piñera is the brother of Sebastián Piñera, the president who Jimena spoke so fondly of a minute ago. He would later become a graduate of Harvard. So he's there, comes to the United States, goes to Harvard, does all of that. 1973 is the coup in Chile. 1977, Piñera returns to Chile. He becomes a part of the Pinochet government, becomes what are called first in Chile the Chicago Boys, because there was this overwhelming amount of people who were connected to the University of Chicago or to the Universidad Católica and to the people who had graduated from it, who became top advisors and architects in that government. And then 1978, you get a movement in the United States that is spearheaded by conservative think tanks, the Cato Institute, the American Enterprise Institute, the Heritage Foundation, to try to privatize Social Security in the United States. Okay, that's the beginning of that. Well, they weren't able to do that when Ronald Reagan came into office. He began trying to cut the benefits of Social Security, but he knew even with his political capital, he didn't have enough to really do that in the United States. However, under the conditions of a military dictatorship in Chile, it became possible to do that. And Jose Piñera was the architect of the complete privatization of the Chilean Social Security system. He did it under ideal conditions from the point of view that there was no democratic opposition to stop him. I mean, we've all seen in the United States, which I would not consider to be a model of democratic participation, but that every time that there's a move against Social Security, there's a groundswell of opposition to it. Well, in a military dictatorship, that problem was taken care of. So that's then 1981. Now, that 1981 is also the year that is the beginning of the transformation of most employee retirement plans from defined benefit traditional pensions to 401ks. If you go back to 1981, of those people who had employer-sponsored retirement plans, the overwhelming majority of them had traditional pensions. If you come to today, it's exactly the reverse. They have managed that whole transformation. Now, it turns out that Chile, in a lot of ways, became the model for a lot of other countries. But at first, it was under very suspicious conditions, a military dictatorship, so it kind of sat out there. But in 1990, when there was a return to formal democracy in Chile, no one in Chile was really questioning what had been done with the retirement system. And there's a very simple reason. It's the same thing as what happened with 401ks here. In the beginning of these transformations, the people who sponsored them promised everything. They said that people were going to become super rich through these things. They presented models that showed that if you just, put your money into it and you saved it, it would compound, the investments would grow, and in 20 years, 30 years, you'd become a millionaire or something like that. Okay. Now, they were using models. You know? Well, 30 years down the road, we don't need models. We can look at actual experience, and it didn't happen that way. But nobody really quite knew that at that time. And so Chile, then, now that it is a formal democracy, is returned to the fold, and it becomes much more advantageous to use it for transformations in other countries. So in 1991, a man by the name of Lawrence Summers, who you may recognize from the Clinton and Obama administrations, commissions a study by the World Bank that is published in 1994 called Averting the Old Age Crisis. The study doesn't come out right out and say Chile is the way to go, okay, but it might just as well do that. Okay. It essentially says that every country should really privatize its national retirement system. If you want to look at why the whole issue of privatization keeps coming back in the United States, it doesn't matter whether the Republicans or Democrats in office, it always comes back. Like the last threat was with the Simpson-Bowles report on the deficit, and we didn't really know what Obama was going to do on it. And then finally he came out with a reasonably good position on it, but we don't know how much that'll hold. Bill Clinton, was getting ready to privatize at least part of Social Security, and then the Monica Lewinsky scandal broke, and he was in no position to do anything quite that bold. So that's always sitting there. If you want to look at what the thinking is behind what's going on in the United States in that respect, read Averting the Old Age Crisis. Okay, because in it you will see that systems like Social Security should be reduced to basically means-tested programs for the poor, and everything else should be private investment, into the stock market, and that is the basis of your retirement. Well, okay, back to the World Bank. The World Bank then begins a campaign, and Chileans, among others, become advisors in another number of countries to transform those systems. They would have liked to transform the European systems because they have the most national systems, the biggest bulk of it. They were much less successful there. They made some inroads. Where they made their greatest success was in Latin America. That is, by 2000, over half of Latin Americans lived in a country that had either partially or fully privatized its national retirement system. One of the examples I'm very familiar with is Mexico. After the peso crisis in 1996, the Zedillo government completely privatized, along the lines of the Chilean system, the Mexican Social Security system. And get this, between the time the legislation was introduced and it was passed was 30 days. No debate anywhere. It was just done in one fell swoop like that. And like everywhere else, they promised that people would make would have much more generous retirements doing something like this. So back to Chile. Okay, formal democracy returns. Still, everybody thinks the military dictatorship is guilty of all kinds of human rights abuses, but nobody really thought about the retirement issue much. I think part of the reason why people didn't think about that is because it's a very complicated subject. Okay, it's one that I think I don't think it takes an enormous amount of training, but it does take reading at least 2 or 3 books to really get your hands on how these things actually work to understand it. But by 1995, some doubts were beginning to be raised. In 1998, Jose Piñera left Chile, and he went to the Cato Institute in Washington to head up its Social Security privatization project. And he is still there, by the way. Okay, if you look up his name, there are just a zillion references to him on the internet. Okay. In 2000, actually in 1999, there's an organization, and it was Jimena de la Vara who led me to this organization called Senda in Santiago de Chile, that they were having a radio program on a time when nobody ever listened about subjects about international economics and so forth. And a listener wrote in a letter questioning the whole retirement system. And they read the letter. He had all kinds of mathematical reasons why it wouldn't work. They didn't really know what to make of it. They showed it to the other people who knew something about it. And after about 2 or 3 months of studying it, they realized there was nothing wrong in what this listener was saying. His math was completely right. They began to study it much more in depth, and they came to the conclusion that the whole thing was a swindle, that people would, as we were in Connecticut, be receiving less than half as much in retirement benefits from this. And they began to write this up. They began to divulge all of this to the public. It became such an issue that in the 2005 presidential election, it was the major issue, was what was to be done about retirement. The New York Times got into it in 2005. Larry Reuter went to the Senda office, then wrote an article, a front-page article, in which he said that the Chilean system comes far short of promises, or some such headline like that. Piñera was asked to comment on it, and he wouldn't comment on it. He continues to just say that the Chilean system is entirely successful. So they began a whole campaign that was like the campaign that we were doing in Connecticut, that the only solution to this was to end the privatized system and return to the traditional pension system. By 2008, it was clear that something had to be done, and so a reform was made in Chile, but it was far short of what Senda wanted, or far short than what was adequate. What happened was that the government raised the minimum pension level, which was valuable to a number of people, but it still allowed this essential fraud to go on, where all of these commissions are being collected and so forth by the private sector. I have to say that when I went to the Senda office, and I talked to the man who was most responsible for this, Manuel Riesco, and I was describing what was happening in Connecticut, and he was talking about what was happening in Chile, and we could practically complete each other's sentences. It was so close, down to the point when I said that the company that was the head of our retirement system was ING, which is a Dutch multinational corporation, and he said, no. They're the biggest player in Chile also. So this is an international issue with the same sorts of responses elsewhere. Let's take a quick look briefly, and then I'll stop, at Argentina. Argentina in the early 1990s had the fame of being the country that most towed the line on neoliberal reforms. So it was not surprising that in 1993 it too privatized its retirement system. It was a multi-tier model where the first two were defined benefits but minimum, but the third tier, which was supposed to provide the bulk of income, you had your choice of continuing in the defined benefit pension or going into a newly privatized system. And something like 98% of people went into the newly privatized system because there were all kinds of people, as everywhere, promising that they were going to make money, okay, make enormous amounts of money as a result of this. I said 98, actually 82% is the exact number of people, new people who chose this privatized system. Okay. Then on the rules of the game were, now that there were two possibilities here, whether you could be in the traditional pension or the privatized system, was that if you were in the traditional pension and at some point down the road after this initial choice you decided you wanted to change your mind and go into the privatized, that was okay. But you couldn't go the other way. Okay, you couldn't go if you decided that the privatized system wasn't working, you couldn't go into the traditional pension. They set it up that way to attract people, which was exactly what we had in Connecticut too. We supposedly we never signed, but we made an irrevocable decision. When we look back at those records, we discovered no one ever signed anything, nor were they ever told it was irrevocable. But it's in the Internal Revenue Service Code that when you go into one of these types of plans in the United States, it's irrevocable. So it's a type of financial serfdom that we have. Anyway, the Argentinian Senate in 2007 decided that that was not fair, okay, and that people should have the right to change back if they wanted to. Okay, they wouldn't get credit for the past time, but everything new would go into the traditional pension. And so they set it up so that there was a 180-day window of opportunity to make this transfer. And everybody was very curious as to how many people would actually transfer, because nobody really knew, you know, if given the choice at that point. Well, the private companies that were running the 401k type scheme in Argentina immediately set up a simulator, an online simulator, where you could plug in what your situation was, and it would estimate which of these was to your advantage. And you can guess what came out. Okay, that overwhelmingly it was much better to stay in the private system. I mean, it was so bad that the Argentinian government, after it being up for something like 150 of the 180 days, made them take it down, okay, because it was so distorted. Okay, but it apparently did a lot of damage during that time, and only 20% of people actually transferred, okay, at that time. Okay, but the law was set up that in another 5 years there would be another window of opportunity. So that's how Argentina handled it. Then the 2008 crash came, okay, all over the world, okay, and people who had their money in these accounts, like here in the United States with 401ks, saw them dramatically plunge like that. And the Kirchner government in Argentina just decided to end once and for all the privatized accounts. They essentially nationalized the whole system. Okay, it was the only country that has ever done that. Bolivia is thinking of doing that. I'm not sure how far along they are on that, but they did what the people in Chile wanted to happen in Chile and what we want in Connecticut. They just did it. Let's see what I want more. Okay. Okay. No, that was it. So I'm going to stop. I've laid out a lot of things. Let me just end with a kind of quick online promotion. We've learned a lot in Connecticut about these plans. If anybody's in a situation like we are and they want to get out of a state employee 401k type plan, if there's a pension plan in their state to move into, you should contact us. If you go online and Google CT ARP crisis, ARP, CT for Connecticut crisis, I would give you the URL, but it's about this long. You can get to us. Another way to get to me is I have a website called perfectswindle.com, which is about retirement policy in the United States. Its basic purpose is to defend Social Security, defined benefit pensions, and a critique of the 401k transformation. And we put up a lot of documents on that. So thank you very much.